She did not run because she feared death. She ran because she wanted to choose how she would die. The snow fell in thick curtains across the village of Thornhaven, burying the wooden homes under a blanket of white silence. Seraphina Ashford stood at her father's grave, her breath forming small clouds that vanished into the frozen air. The headstone was simple, carved from river stone, bearing only his name and the words he had lived by. Edmund Ashford, hunter, father, protector. 3 months. 3 months since the fever had taken him, leaving her alone in a world that had already decided her fate. She was 19 years old and she was dying. The village healer had given his diagnosis with the practiced detachment of a man who had delivered such news many times before. The frost fade, he called it. A rare affliction that turned the body cold from within, a slow freezing of the blood that no medicine could reverse. She had perhaps 1 season left, maybe 2 if the gods were merciful. But the gods of Thornhaven had never been known for their mercy. Sarah pressed her hand against the cold stone of her father's grave, feeling the bite of winter through her thin gloves. Edmund Ashford had been the greatest hunter the Northern Territories had ever known. He had taught her to track deer through snowstorms, to read the language of broken twigs and displaced snow. He had placed her first bow in her hands when she was 7 years old and declared that his daughter would never be helpless, never be prey. 20 years ago, he had done what no other hunter dared. He had killed a Lycan. The creature had wandered too close to human settlements, driven mad by some unknown affliction. It had slaughtered 3 children before Edmund found it. The battle had lasted through an entire night, and when dawn broke, her father emerged from the Blackwood forest carrying wounds that would scar him for life. But the beast was dead, and the village had crowned him a hero. Sarah had grown up on that story. She had also grown up on the warnings that came with it. The Blackwood was sacred ground to the Lycan kind, a vast territory of ancient pines and shadow where humans were forbidden to enter. The treaty signed 200 years ago, after the Great War, had established clear boundaries. Humans stayed in their lands. Lycans stayed in theirs. Those who crossed the border did not return. Now, standing in the cemetery with snow gathering in her dark hair, Sarah understood that the boundary might be her only escape. Behind her, the village was preparing for the winter festival. She could hear the sounds of celebration beginning, the crackling of bonfires, the distant melody of pipes. But there would be no celebration for her. Not tonight. Tonight, Chieftain Roderick would announce her as his intended bride before the entire village, and by morning, her freedom would be nothing more than a memory. Roderick was 53 years old, a bear of a man with a gray-streaked beard and hands that had grown soft from years of counting taxes instead of wielding weapons. His first wife had died giving birth to a stillborn son. His second wife had fled in the night, preferring exile to his bed. Now he had set his sights on Sarah, and in a village where the chieftain's word was law, no one would speak against him. He did not want her for her beauty, though she knew she was fair enough with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. He wanted her for her blood. The Ashford bloodline had produced warriors and hunters for 7 generations, and Roderick believed that marrying into it would strengthen his own weak lineage. It was superstition wrapped in desperation, the belief of a man watching his legacy crumble. Sarah had refused him 3 times. She had been polite at first, then firm, then openly defiant. Each refusal had darkened his expression, tightened the cruel set of his mouth. The last time, he had grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises and whispered that she would learn to be grateful, that she had no choice. But there was always a choice. Her father had taught her that. She touched the grave one final time, letting her fingers trace the carved letters of his name. Then she turned and walked back toward the small cabin at the edge of the village, the home where she had been born and where she had planned to die. The interior was sparse but warm, heated by a fire that had been burning since morning. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, gathering the supplies she had been secretly preparing for days. A hunting knife with a bone handle, worn smooth by her father's grip. A bow of yew wood, strong enough to pierce hide at 50 paces. A quiver of arrows fletched with crow feathers, dried meat, a water skin, a coil of rope, and a small pouch of medicinal herbs that might ease the symptoms of the frost fade even if they could not cure it. She dressed in her father's old hunting leathers, the material soft and supple from years of use. They were too large for her slender frame, but they would keep out the cold better than any dress Roderick might expect her to wear to his announcement. The last thing she took was her mother's pendant, a silver crescent moon on a thin chain. Helena Ashford had died when Sarah was 4 years old, taken by what her father called winter fever. But even as a child, Sarah had sensed there was more to the story. Her father's eyes would darken whenever her mother's name was mentioned, and he would change the subject with a haste that spoke of buried pain. She had few memories of Helena, only impressions of warmth, and a voice that sang strange melodies in a language she did not recognize. Her father had never spoken of where her mother came from, only that she had wandered out of the Blackwood one summer night, wounded and afraid, and that he had fallen in love with her before she ever spoke a word. Strange, Sarah thought, tucking the pendant beneath her shirt. She was about to enter the same forest her mother had fled from, and she had no intention of coming back. The festival was in full swing when she slipped out the back door and into the darkness. The villagers were gathered around the great fire in the center square, their faces lit by flames, their voices raised in songs that had been sung for generations. No one noticed the shadow moving along the tree line. No one saw the hunter's daughter disappear into the night. The border of the Blackwood was marked by a line of ancient standing stones, carved with symbols that had worn smooth over centuries. Beyond them, the forest rose like a wall of darkness, the pines so thick and tall that they blocked out the stars. Sarah paused at the boundary, feeling the weight of generations of warnings pressing down on her. Do not enter the Blackwood. Those who cross do not return. The beasts within are without mercy. She stepped over the line and did not look back. The forest swallowed her immediately. The sounds of the village vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to press against her ears. The trees here were older than anything she had ever seen, their trunks wider than houses, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy that blocked all light. Snow still fell, but it was different here, softer somehow, as if even the weather obeyed different laws within these borders. Sarah moved carefully, her hunter's instincts guiding her steps. She avoided the obvious paths, knowing that trails in the wild were often made by predators. Instead, she picked her way through the undergrowth, leaving as little trace as possible. Her father had taught her that survival in hostile territory was about becoming invisible, about moving through the world without disturbing it. For the first hour, she almost believed she might succeed. Then she felt it, the sensation of being watched. It was not a sound or a sight, but a pressure, a weight of attention that settled over her like a physical force. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. Her hand moved to her bow, fitting an arrow to the string with the automatic precision of years of practice. Something was tracking her. She changed direction, moving perpendicular to her original path. The presence followed. She doubled back, crossing her own trail. The presence remained, patient and persistent. She broke into a run, abandoning caution for speed, crashing through brush and leaping over fallen logs. The presence kept pace without effort. Sarah stopped in a small clearing, her breath coming in ragged gasps that formed clouds in the freezing air. The cold was seeping into her bones now, deeper than it should have been, and she recognized the early symptoms of the frost fade asserting itself. Her hands trembled as she raised her bow, turning in a slow circle, searching for the threat she could feel but not see. The wolf emerged from the shadows between one heartbeat and the next. No, not a wolf, something far more terrifying. It was massive, larger than any natural creature had a right to be, its shoulders level with her own. Its fur was a mix of shadow and silver, catching what little moonlight penetrated the canopy and turning it into something that seemed to glow from within. Its eyes were not the eyes of a beast. They were golden, intelligent, ancient, and they fixed on her with an intensity that stopped her heart. Lycan. She loosed the arrow before conscious thought could stop her. It flew true, aimed at the creature's eye, a killing shot that would have dropped any normal predator. The Lycan moved faster than anything she had ever seen. Its head tilted slightly, almost lazily, and the arrow passed through empty air to embed itself in a tree trunk behind. The creature did not attack. It simply watched her, its great head tilted in what might have been curiosity. Sarah fitted another arrow to her string, knowing it was futile but refusing to die without a fight. The Lycan took a step forward, Then another. Its movements were fluid, silent, carrying the weight of centuries. It circled her slowly, its golden eyes never leaving hers, and she understood with terrible clarity that she was being assessed, measured, judged. It stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see the individual strands of silver in its fur, could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. The scent of it filled her nostrils, wild and ancient, like forests and moonlight and something darker, something that called to a part of her she did not recognize. The creature leaned in, and Sarah closed her eyes, waiting for the killing blow. Instead, she felt the warm rush of its breath against her neck. It was smelling her, drawing in long, deep inhalations, as if trying to memorize her very essence. The intimacy of it was more terrifying than violence would have been. Then the Lycan made a sound. It was not a growl or a snarl. It was something between a groan and a whimper, a sound of shock and recognition, and something that might have been pain. The creature pulled back, its golden eyes wide, its massive body trembling. The air around it began to shimmer. Sarah had heard stories of Lycan transformation, whispered tales of bones cracking and flesh reshaping. The reality was nothing like the stories. It was beautiful and terrible, a blur of motion and light that seemed to fold in on itself until where the wolf had stood, a man now knelt. He was naked, his skin gleaming with sweat despite the cold. His body was a map of old scars, silver lines that crossed his chest and back like the writing of some violent history. His hair was the same shade as the wolf's fur, dark shot through with silver, falling in tangled waves around a face that might have been carved from stone. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth set in a line of controlled tension. And his eyes were still gold, burning with a light that was not human. He rose to his full height, and Sarah realized he was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, built with the kind of muscle that came not from vanity, but from centuries of survival. He looked at her with an expression she could not read, and when he spoke, his voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "You are the first human in 300 years to raise a weapon against me and live." Sarah's hands did not waver. The arrow remained pointed at his heart, though she knew now that it would do nothing against a creature of his power. But she would not cower. She would not beg. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Then perhaps you should remedy that oversight." Something flickered in his golden gaze. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. He moved toward her, and she loosed the arrow. He caught it out of the air, his hand closing around the shaft with casual contempt. He snapped it in two and let the pieces fall to the snow. "Who are you?" The question was more command than inquiry. "Seraphina Ashford." Sarah kept her voice level, though her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Daughter of Edmund Ashford." Recognition flashed across his features. The hunter. The one who killed the mad wolf 20 years ago. "He was my father." The Lycan studied her with renewed interest. His nostrils flared, and she realized he was scenting her again, drawing in information that she could not fathom. "Your father killed one of my kind." His voice was cold. "By our laws, his bloodline owes a debt." Fear lanced through her, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "My father killed a creature that had slaughtered 3 children. If your laws condemn him for protecting the innocent, then your laws are unjust." The silence that followed was absolute. The Lycan stood motionless, his golden gaze boring into her, and Sarah prepared herself for death. Then impossibly he laughed. It was a short sound, rusty with disuse, as if he had not found anything amusing in a very long time. "The mad wolf was beyond saving. Your father did what needed to be done. I would have killed the creature myself if he had not." Sarah blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Then why speak of debts? To see how you would respond." His expression grew serious. "You did not beg. You did not weep. You defended your father's honor even when you believed it would cost you your life." He took another step closer, and this time Sarah did not raise her bow. There was something in his presence that made resistance feel pointless, a gravity that pulled at her very being. "Why are you in my forest, Seraphina Ashford?" She could have lied. She could have invented some story about being lost or seeking refuge. But something in those ancient golden eyes demanded truth. "I came here to die on my own terms." The Lycan went still. His nostrils flared again, and this time she saw understanding dawn in his expression. He could smell it on her, she realized. the frost fade, the slow death that was claiming her from within. "You are ill." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "A wasting sickness. The healers say I have 1 season left." "And you chose to spend that season in a forest filled with creatures who would kill you on sight?" "I chose to spend it free." Sarah's voice cracked slightly, the first break in her composure. Better to die running than to live as a slave. The Lycan was silent for a long moment. His eyes moved over her, taking in her hunting leathers, her weapons, the stubborn set of her jaw. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, though no less commanding. "What is the name of the man you fled from?" Sarah hesitated, then answered, "Chieftain Roderick of Thornhaven." Something dark passed over the Lycan's features. He turned away from her, looking out into the forest as if seeing something beyond her mortal perception. "I know of Roderick. His grandfather broke the treaty 40 years ago, led a hunting party into our lands. 12 of my people died before we drove them back." Sarah said nothing. She had not known that piece of history. The Lycan turned back to her, and his expression had changed. There was calculation in it now, mixed with something else she could not identify. "You are dying, Seraphina Ashford." He said it as a statement of fact, without pity or judgment. "But you do not have to die tonight. Not here, not alone." Before she could respond, he moved. His speed was inhuman. One moment he was standing 6 feet away. The next, he was directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat of his body against the frozen air. His hand came up to cradle her face, his palm rough with calluses, his fingers surprisingly gentle. "Be still," he murmured, and his voice had dropped to something that was almost tender. "Let me scent you." He leaned in, his nose tracing the line of her jaw, her neck, the curve of her shoulder. Each breath he drew seemed to pull something from deep within her, some essence she had not known she possessed. The intimacy of it should have been terrifying, but instead she felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest, pushing back against the cold that had lived in her bones for months. When he pulled back, his golden eyes were blazing with an emotion she could not name. "Impossible," he whispered. "This is impossible." "What is impossible?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he took her hand in his, and the contact sent a jolt through her entire body, a shock of recognition that seemed to echo in her very soul. "Come with me," he said. His voice had regained its command, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in it now. "There are things you need to know, things that cannot be explained in this cold." Sarah should have refused. Every instinct, every lesson her father had taught her, screamed that following a Lycan into the depths of his territory was suicide. But something else, something deeper than instinct, something that hummed in her blood like a half-remembered song, told her to trust. She nodded. The Lycan did not smile, but something in his expression softened. He released her hand and stepped back, and the air around him began to shimmer once more. The transformation was faster this time, smoother, and within moments the massive wolf stood before her again. He lowered his body to the ground, a clear invitation. Sarah hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she climbed onto his back, her fingers gripping the thick fur of his neck, her legs pressing against his powerful sides. He began to run, and the forest blurred around them. They traveled through the night, moving deeper into the Blackwood than any human had ventured in 2 centuries. The wolf ran with a tireless grace, his great body eating up the miles as if distance meant nothing to him. Sarah clung to his back, her face pressed against his fur to shield herself from the biting wind, and for the first time since her father's death, she did not feel cold. Dawn was breaking when they finally emerged from the forest into a valley she had not known existed. The fortress rose from the mountainside like something from a legend, its walls carved from the living rock, its towers reaching toward the lightning sky. It was vast and ancient, beautiful in a way that was also terrifying, and Sarah understood that she was looking at the heart of Lycan civilization. Torches burned along the battlements, their flames dancing against the pale morning light. The gates were forged from some dark metal she did not recognize, etched with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she looked at them too long. Guards patrolled the walls, their movements synchronized with the precision of warriors who had trained together for decades, perhaps centuries. "Blackmore," she breathed. The wolf stopped at the gates, and figures emerged to meet them. They were all Lycan, she knew, though they wore human form. Warriors with golden and silver and amber eyes, their bodies marked with the same history of violence as the one who had carried her here. They looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. One of them, a tall man with gray, streaked hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, stepped forward. "My king." His voice was controlled, but Sarah heard the tension beneath it. "You bring a human into our stronghold?" The wolf shifted, and the man she had met in the forest stood before her once more. He had somehow acquired clothing during the transformation, simple dark trousers and a tunic that did nothing to hide his powerful frame. "This woman is not a prisoner, Darius." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "She is under my protection." The one called Darius looked at Sarah with an expression she could not read. "And what is she to you, my king?" The Lycan, the king, was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words seemed to carry a significance that Sarah did not fully understand. "She carries the mate scent." The effect was immediate. Every Lycan in the courtyard went still. Darius's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. "That is impossible. She is human." "I know what she is." The king's voice brooked no argument. "And I know what I sensed. Bring Morella to my chambers. There are questions that need answers." He turned to Sarah, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You asked my name in the forest. I did not give it." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how small she felt among these creatures. "I am Caelan Blackmore." His golden eyes held hers with an intensity that seemed to see straight through her. "King of the northern packs, lord of the Blackwood, and by laws older than human memory, your life is now bound to mine." Before Sarah could respond, before she could protest or question or demand an explanation, the world tilted around her. The exhaustion of her flight through the forest, the cold that had been kept at bay by the wolf's warmth, the shock of everything she had witnessed, all of it crashed down on her at once. She felt herself falling, and strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Caelan's voice, low and fierce, and filled with something that might have been fear. "Get the healer, now!" She woke in darkness. For a moment, Sarah thought she was back in her cabin in Thornhaven, that everything had been a dream born of fever and desperation. But the bed beneath her was too soft, the air too warm, the scent surrounding her too wild and unfamiliar. She opened her eyes and found herself in a chamber that could only belong to a king. The room was carved from the same dark stone as the fortress, but it had been softened with tapestries depicting great hunts under full moons, with thick furs piled on the floor, with a fire burning in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The bed she lay in was massive, its posts carved with running wolves, its covers a sea of pelts that held heat like nothing she had ever known. Weapons hung on the walls, swords and axes, and things she had no names for, each one bearing the marks of actual use rather than mere decoration. This was not a room built for comfort alone. It was the den of a warrior king. And sitting beside the bed, watching her with those ancient golden eyes, was Caelan. "How long?" Her voice was rough, her throat dry. 2 days. He did not move, did not reach for her, but his gaze was intent. "The fever broke last night. Morella says you will live." "Morella?" "Our healer, the oldest of our kind still drawing breath. She has tended to the Lycan for 5 centuries. Sarah absorbed this, trying to fit it into her understanding of the world. A healer who had lived for 500 years. A king who had ruled for 300. A fortress that seemed to exist outside of time itself. "Why did you bring me here?" Caelan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, as if he were choosing each word with deliberate precision. "Do you know what a mate bond is, Seraphina?" She shook her head. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, looking out over the valley below. "Among my kind, there is no greater sacred law than the bond between mates. It is not a choice. It is not a decision. It is a recognition, deep in the soul, of the one being in all the world who is meant to complete you. When a Lycan finds their mate, they know. The scent, the pull, the connection. It cannot be faked. It cannot be denied." He turned back to her, and his expression was troubled. "When I scented you in the forest, I recognized the mate bond. You carry my scent as I carry yours. By every law of my people, you belong with me." Sarah's heart was pounding. "That is impossible. I am human." "Yes." He moved closer, his movements predatory even when gentled. "That is the impossibility. In 300 years of life, in all the histories of our kind, there has never been a mate bond between Lycan and human. It should not exist. It cannot exist. And yet here we are. And yet here we are." He stopped at the edge of the bed, looking down at her. "There is more. When Morella examined you, she found something in your blood. A marker, a trace of something that should not be there. The frost fade." "No." He shook his head. "Something older than your sickness. Something we have not seen in 500 years. The door opened before he could continue, and an elderly woman entered. She was small and bent with age, but her eyes were sharp, the pale blue of winter ice. She moved with a grace that belied her apparent frailty, and Sarah understood that this was Morella, the healer who had tended Lycan Kings for 5 centuries. "She is awake." Morella's voice was soft, but carried easily through the chamber. "Good. There are things she must know." The healer settled into the chair Kaelin had vacated, her ancient eyes studying Sarah with an intensity that seemed to peel back layers of skin and bone to see something deeper within. "Tell me, child, what do you know of your mother?" Sarah blinked at the unexpected question. "Very little. She died when I was 4. My father rarely spoke of her. But you know she came from somewhere unusual." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to the pendant hidden beneath her shift. "She came out of the Blackwood one night, wounded, alone. My father found her and took her in." Morella nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "Your mother's pendant. May I see it?" Sarah hesitated, then drew the chain from beneath her clothing. The silver crescent moon caught the firelight, gleaming with a soft luminescence. Morella's breath caught. "I thought so. I feared so." "What is it?" Kaelin's voice was sharp. "What do you know?" "This symbol." Morella's finger traced the air above the pendant without touching it. "I have not seen it in 500 years. It belongs to a bloodline we believed extinct, the Moonweavers." Sarah looked between them, confusion and fear warring in her chest. "What are Moonweavers?" "They were witches." Morella's voice took on the cadence of old memory. "Humans with a trace of something else in their blood, something that allowed them to connect with the spirits of the moon and forest. They were bridge builders, healers of the rift between our kinds, and they were hunted to extinction during the Great War." Kaelin had gone very still. If she carries Moonweaver blood, that would explain the mate bond. The Moonweavers were the only humans who could form such connections with our kind. "Yes." Morella's eyes met Sarah's with something that might have been pity, but it also explained something else, the curse that is killing you. Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The frost fade is not a natural illness, child. It is a curse, an ancient working of dark magic designed to drain the life force from those who carry it. And I have seen this curse before." "Where?" Morella looked at Kaelin, and something passed between them, a silent communication laden with grief and memory. 200 years ago. Morella's voice was barely above a whisper. "On Queen Isolde, your predecessor as Kaelin's mate." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah looked at Kaelin and saw something in his face that she had not seen before. Pain, raw and ancient and barely contained. "What happened to her?" Sarah's voice was small in the vastness of the chamber. "She died." Kaelin's words were like stones dropping into still water. "She died, and our child with her, and I was not there to save them. I was at the border, fighting a war, while the woman I loved bled out in our bed from a curse I did not know existed. The same curse that is killing me." "Yes." Morella's voice was heavy with the weight of centuries. "The same curse, cast by the same hand." "Who?" Sarah demanded. "Who would do such a thing?" Kaelin turned away, his hands clenching into fists. "I believed for 200 years that humans had killed Isolde, that agents of your kind had breached our defenses and murdered my queen. I waged war on that belief. I have killed in her name more times than I can count. But you were wrong. I was wrong." He turned back to face her, and his golden eyes were burning. The curse that killed Isolde was not human magic. It was Lycan. The implications of his words settled over Sarah like a shroud. A Lycan had killed the queen. A Lycan had cursed the Moonweaver bloodline, and that same curse was now claiming her. "Who?" she asked again. Kaelin's expression hardened into something terrible and cold. "There is only one of my kind with both the power and the hatred to create such a curse. His name is Varan Bloodthorn. He rules the Eastern Pack and has been my enemy for 3 centuries. And 200 years ago, he discovered something that drove him to madness." "What?" "That Isolde was his mate as well." Sarah stared at him, uncomprehending. "That is not possible. You said the mate bond was singular, sacred." "It is. In all our history, there has only ever been one exception." Morella's voice was tired, ancient with the weight of knowledge, the Moonweavers. Because of their unique nature, because of the bridge they formed between worlds, they could sometimes be recognized as mates by more than one Lycan. Isolde was bonded to both of us. Kaelin's voice was rough with old grief. She chose me, she loved me. We were building a life together, expecting a child who would unite our bloodlines. And Varen could not accept that. No, he called it theft. He called it betrayal. And when he could not have her, he decided that no one would. He killed her. He cursed her. He cursed all of them. Every woman who carried the Moonweaver blood. He swore that they would fade like snow in spring, that they would feel the cold of his hatred in their very bones until they were nothing but memories. Sarah's hand went to her chest, where the pendant lay against her skin. And now he has cursed me. You are the last of them, child. Morella's voice was gentle but implacable. The last Moonweaver, the last hope of bridging the rift between our kinds. And if Varen learns you exist, if he learns that Kaelin has found another mate, he will stop at nothing to destroy you. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the wind howled against the walls of the ancient fortress. And Sarah understood, with a clarity that cut through her fear, that her flight from one danger had led her directly into another. She had escaped a chieftain who wanted to own her body. Now she faced a war between kings who wanted to claim her soul. And somewhere in the depths of her blood, in the heritage she had never known she carried, lay the power that might save her or doom them all. She looked at Kaelin, at the grief and determination, and something that might have been hope in his ancient golden eyes. What happens now? She asked. He met her gaze without flinching. Now we find out how to break the curse that is killing you. Now we prepare for the war that Varen will bring when he discovers your existence. Now we uncover the truth about your mother, your bloodline, and the power that sleeps in your veins. He reached out and took her hand, and the contact sent that same jolt of recognition through her, that same inexplicable sense of connection. His palm was warm against her cold fingers, rough with the calluses of a warrior, gentle despite the strength she knew those hands possessed. And now, Seraphina Ashford, last of the Moonweavers, daughter of a hunter and a witch, you decide whether you will face what comes as my enemy, my prisoner, or my ally. The choice hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing into the darkness of the chimney. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of snow and pine and something older, something that spoke of ancient magic and forgotten truths. Sarah thought of her father, who had taught her to never be helpless. She thought of her mother, who had fled this forest carrying secrets that had cost her everything. She thought of the curse in her blood, the cold that had haunted her for months, the death that had seemed inevitable. Then she thought of the warmth of the wolf's fur, the strength of Kaelin's arms when she fell, the fierce protectiveness in his voice when he commanded his people to save her. She squeezed his hand. I did not come to this forest to be anyone's enemy or prisoner. Her voice was stronger now, steady despite everything. I came here to die free, but if there is a chance to live free instead, to understand who I am and where I come from, to fight the one who cursed my bloodline instead of waiting for death to claim me. She met his golden eyes without flinching. Then I will stand beside you, not as your possession, not as your weakness, as your ally. Something shifted in Kaelin's expression. The cold mask of the king cracked, just slightly, and beneath it she glimpsed the man who had laughed in the forest, who had carried her through the night on his back, who looked at her with something that went deeper than possession. Then welcome to Blackmoor, Seraphina. His voice was soft but fierce. Welcome to war. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of blood and gold. And somewhere in the east, Sarah knew, another king was waiting. The game had only just begun. The days that followed were unlike anything Seraphina had ever experienced. She was not a prisoner, though she could not leave. She was not a guest, though she was treated with a deference that made her uncomfortable. She existed in a strange middle ground, watched by golden eyes wherever she went, spoken to in hushed tones by servants who seemed unsure whether to fear her or pity her. The curse continued its slow work within her body. Each morning she woke with the cold deeper in her bones. Each night she fell asleep, shivering, despite the roaring fire in Kaelin's chambers. Morella came twice daily to administer bitter teas and examine the progression of the frost fade, her ancient face betraying nothing of what she saw. But there was hope now, where before there had been only the certainty of death. Kaelin had given her access to the great library of Blackmoor, a cavernous hall filled with scrolls and tomes that dated back to the founding of the Lycan nation. He had assigned scholars to assist her, elderly Lycans who remembered the Moonweavers and the old magic that had once flowed freely between their kinds. And most importantly, he had committed himself to the search. The Lycan King spent hours each day at her side, reading through crumbling manuscripts, following leads that more often than not led nowhere, sharing meals in companionable silence when the work became too frustrating. He was patient in a way she had not expected, thorough in a way that spoke of a mind honed by centuries of strategy and survival. And slowly, despite everything, Sarah found herself beginning to trust him. It was a dangerous thing, trust. Her father had warned her about giving it too freely, about the ways it could be used as a weapon against the one who offered it. But Edmund Ashford had also taught her to judge people by their actions rather than their words, and Kaelin's actions spoke of something genuine beneath the cold exterior of the king. He brought her warm clothes from the finest Lycan craftsmen, soft furs and sturdy leather that fit her body perfectly. He ensured that food was brought to her at regular intervals, hearty stews and fresh bread that helped maintain her strength even as the curse worked against her. He answered her questions about Lycan history and culture with a patience that surprised her, explaining traditions and customs that she needed to understand to navigate her new world. And when the cold became too much, when the frost fade sent shivers racking through her body despite all the fires and furs, he would sit beside her and take her hand in his, letting the supernatural warmth of his Lycan blood flow into her veins. He never asked for anything in return. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give. He simply sat with her, steady and solid as the mountain beneath their feet, and waited for the crisis to pass. It was during one of these episodes, a particularly bad night when the cold seemed to reach into her very heart, that Sarah finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Tell me about her." Sarah's voice was weak, her teeth chattering despite the blankets piled over her. "Tell me about Isolde. Not the facts. I know the facts. Tell me who she was." Kaelin was silent for a long moment. His hand tightened around hers, and she felt the warmth pulse stronger, pushing back against the ice in her blood. She was fire. His voice was rough, the words pulled from somewhere deep and painful. In a world of calculation and politics, she burned with a light that could not be contained. She laughed at my dignity, challenged my authority, made me remember what it felt like to be young. He paused, his golden eyes distant with memory. "We met during a border dispute. Her village had been attacked by rogues, Lycans who had rejected pack law and turned feral. She had organized the survivors, led them to safety, faced down the rogues with nothing but a woodcutter's axe and a determination that I had never seen in a human. When I arrived with my warriors, expecting to rescue helpless villagers, I found her standing over the body of a rogue twice her size, covered in blood that was not her own." Sarah tried to imagine it, a woman standing against monsters with nothing but courage and steel. "I fell in love with her before I knew what she was." Kaelin's voice softened. "Before I understood about the Moonweaver blood, before the mate bond revealed itself. I loved her simply because she was Isolde, fierce and beautiful and utterly unwilling to bow to anyone, even a king. What was she like, in the quiet moments?" He smiled, and it was a sad, distant thing. She sang, constantly. Songs in languages I did not recognize, melodies that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. She would sing while she worked, while she walked, while she tended the gardens she insisted on planting despite the harsh mountain climate. She said the songs helped her remember who she was. "What happened at the end?" He did not answer immediately. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. "We had 3 years together. 3 years of a happiness I had not believed possible. She transformed Blackmoor, brought light and laughter to halls that had known only duty and war. She was carrying our child when the sickness took her. The frost fade." "Yes." Kaelin's jaw clenched. "I was at the border when it began. Varen had launched raids across our territory, and I led the response personally. By the time I returned, she was already fading. 3 days of watching her grow colder, weaker, knowing there was nothing I could do to save her." His hand squeezed hers, almost painfully tight. "She died in this bed, Seraphina, in my arms, and our child died with her, never having drawn a single breath." The raw grief in his voice cut through Sarah's own pain. She understood, in that moment, the depth of what she was dealing with. This was not a king seeking a replacement for a lost queen. This was a man carrying 200 years of guilt and sorrow, facing the possibility of losing again. I am not her. Sarah needed him to understand this. I will never be her. I know. Kaelin met her eyes and something shifted in his expression. I do not want you to be. Isolde was my past, my first love, my greatest loss. You are something different, something I do not yet understand, but I know that I will not let the same fate claim you, not while I draw breath. The warmth from his hand spread through her body, pushing back the cold, granting her a reprieve from the curse's grip. And for the first time since entering the Blackwood, Sarah allowed herself to feel something other than fear. The investigation into the curse's origin proved to be a frustrating endeavor. The library contained thousands of texts, but references to the Moonweavers were scattered and incomplete. Much had been lost during the Great War, when both humans and Lycans had burned each other's histories in their fury. But Sarah was a hunter's daughter, trained to follow trails that others might miss. She approached the research with the same methodical patience her father had taught her, tracking connections between disparate sources, building a picture from fragments and implications. It was during the third week of her stay that she made the first significant discovery. She had been reading a crumbling account of the war's final years when a name caught her attention. Ilara Moonweaver, last matriarch of her line, had reportedly survived the purges by fleeing into the northern territories. The account mentioned a daughter, born in secret, hidden among human villages to protect her from those who hunted the Moonweaver bloodline. Sarah stared at the passage, her heart pounding. The timeline matched. The location matched. If her mother had been descended from Ilara, if the Moonweaver blood had passed down through generations of hiding and secrecy, she showed the passage to Kaelin that evening, watching his expression as he processed the implications. Your mother was not just a woman who wandered out of the Blackwood. His voice was thoughtful. She was the last inheritor of a legacy that stretches back thousands of years, a legacy that someone has been systematically trying to destroy. Varen, perhaps. But there is more to uncover. The curse that killed Isolde, that is killing you, requires power beyond what any single Lycan should possess. Dark magic of this nature leaves traces, signatures that can be tracked if you know what to look for. He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes intense. There is someone who might have answers, someone I have not spoken to in 50 years. Who? My former war chief, a Lycan named Marcus Greymane. He served as my Gamma, commander of our armies, until he retired to the eastern borderlands. He knows more about the old magic than anyone living, and he has spent decades monitoring the movements of the Bloodthorn Pack. Can we trust him? Kaelin's expression hardened. Marcus is one of the few beings in this world I trust absolutely. He fought beside me during the war. He held Isolde's hand when she died. If anyone can help us understand what we are facing, it is him. A messenger was dispatched that night, carrying Kaelin's personal seal and a summons that could not be ignored. And as they waited for a response, Sarah continued her research, driven by a new urgency. The pieces were beginning to come together, painting a picture more complex and more dangerous than she had imagined. It was Darius who provided the next piece of the puzzle. The beta had maintained his distance from Sarah since her arrival, watching her with suspicious gray eyes, speaking to her only when absolutely necessary. She understood his wariness. She was a human in a world of wolves, an anomaly that threatened the order he had helped maintain for centuries. But on an evening when Kaelin was occupied with pack business, Darius appeared at the door to the library where Sarah sat, surrounded by scrolls. "May I enter?" She looked up, surprised by the courtesy. "The library is not mine to deny." He stepped inside, his movements careful, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. He crossed to a chair across from her and settled into it, his large frame somehow appearing almost awkward in the scholarly setting. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Darius sighed, running a scarred hand through his graying hair. "I owe you an apology." Sarah set down the scroll she had been reading. "For what?" "For assuming the worst." His gray eyes met hers directly. "When Kaelin brought you here, I saw only the danger. A human, carrying the mate scent, appearing in our territory after 200 years of carefully maintained peace. I assumed you were a weapon sent by our enemies. And now?" Now I have watched you." Darius's voice was gruff but honest. "I have seen you work beside my king, seen you push yourself past exhaustion in search of answers, seen you refuse to break even as the curse tears you apart from within. Whatever you are not our enemy." It was perhaps the closest thing to acceptance she had received since arriving at Blackmoor. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not realized she was carrying. "Tell me about him." The request surprised her as much as it surprised Darius. "Kaelin, tell me who he was before Isolde died." The beta was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting to something that might have been nostalgia. He was different, lighter. He laughed often, took joy in simple things. He would shift and run through the forest for the sheer pleasure of feeling the wind in his fur. He organized hunts that lasted for days, brought the entire pack together in celebration of what we were. Darius leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "I remember a time when he challenged the young warriors to wrestling matches, letting them tackle him just to build their confidence. I remember him sitting with the elders for hours, listening to their stories, learning the old songs that most of us had forgotten. He was a king, yes, but he was also our heart." What changed? The war with Bloodthorn, the constant fighting, the losses, the weight of decisions that cost lives. And then Isolde. Darius's voice darkened. When she died, something in him died with her. The light went out of his eyes. He became what you see now, cold, controlled, a king made of ice and duty. He looked at Sarah with an expression she could not quite read. "But since you arrived, I have seen something I had not seen in 2 centuries. I have seen him hope. I have seen him smile, truly smile, when he thinks no one is watching. You have given him back something he lost, and for that, whatever else you may be, I am grateful." The words settled over Sarah like a weight, both blessing and burden. She understood what Darius was telling her, the responsibility that came with Kaelin's attention, the danger of becoming another wound that might never heal. "I do not want to hurt him." Her voice was quiet. "I do not want to be the reason he breaks again." "Then do not leave." Darius's response was immediate, fierce. "Do not run. Do not sacrifice yourself thinking it will protect him. I have seen his face when he speaks of you. If you die, if you choose death to spare him pain, you will destroy him far more completely than the curse ever could." The warning hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open and a young Lycan rushed in, his face pale with urgency. "My Lord Darius, Commander Greymane has arrived. He brings grave news from the border." The War Council chamber was a massive circular room deep in the heart of Blackmoor, its walls lined with maps and banners bearing the sigils of allied packs. A round table of polished oak dominated the center, scarred by centuries of strategy sessions and heated debates. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting flickering light over the grim faces of those assembled. Kaelin sat at the head of the table, his golden eyes fixed on the grizzled warrior who had just finished speaking. Marcus Greymane was old even by Lycan standards, his hair entirely silver, his face a map of scars and weathered lines. He had fought in wars that most present had only heard stories about, had buried more warriors than some packs could count among their living, but his eyes were sharp as blades, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded armies through victories and defeats alike. Sarah stood against the wall, having been permitted to attend at Kaelin's insistence. Darius stood beside her, his posture tense with the same worry she could see in every face around the table. "Repeat that last part." Kaelin's voice was controlled, but Sarah could hear the steel beneath it. "I want to be certain I understood." Marcus met his king's gaze without flinching. "The Bloodthorn pack has been calling in all its warriors from the outlying territories. They have been stockpiling weapons, training in formations we have not seen since the Great War. And they have been sending emissaries to the other packs, making promises and threats in equal measure." "What kind of promises?" "Territory. Resources. Freedom from what Varen calls Blackmoor tyranny." Marcus's scarred face twisted with disgust. "He is telling the other packs that you have grown weak, that your obsession with peace has made you unfit to rule. He is promising a return to the old ways, when Lycans took what they wanted and humans existed only as prey." The council chamber erupted in angry murmurs. Kaelin raised his hand, and silence fell instantly. "There is more." His statement was not a question. Marcus nodded slowly, his silver eyes flickering to Sarah for just a moment. There are rumors spreading through the eastern territories. Rumors of a human woman in Blackmoor carrying the scent of the lost Moonweaver bloodline. Rumors that the king has taken a new mate, one who could tip the balance of power if her abilities are fully awakened. How did he learn of this? I do not know. Marcus's voice was grim. But Varen knows, and he is preparing to act. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the room turned toward her, some curious, some hostile, all aware that she had become the center of a conflict that had been building for centuries. Kaelin rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled. The Bloodthorn Pack has been a thorn in our side for 300 years. He addressed the council, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Varen murdered my mate and my unborn child. He has broken treaty after treaty, raided our borders, killed our people, and now he seeks to use the threat of my new bond to justify the war he has always wanted. He turned to face Sarah, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. But he has miscalculated. The Moonweaver bloodline is not a weakness. It is a bridge between our kinds, a power that Varen himself fears because he cannot control it. If Seraphina's abilities can be awakened, if she can break the curse he placed on her bloodline, it will prove that his dark magic can be defeated. One of the council members, an elderly Lycan with amber eyes, spoke up. And if she cannot? If the curse claims her before she can unlock her power? Then we will have lost nothing we would not have lost anyway. Kaelin's voice hardened. But I do not intend to let that happen. Marcus, I want you to take command of our border defenses. Double the patrols, reinforce the crossing points. If Varen wants war, he will find us ready. The old warrior nodded, respect evident in his bearing. It will be done, my king. Darius, begin preparing the stronghold for siege. We have supplies to last through winter, but I want them doubled. And send word to the Silverfang and Ironpaw packs. It is time to call in old debts. The Beta placed his fist over his heart in salute. At once, the council broke up with grim efficiency, each member departing to their assigned tasks. Soon only Kaelin, Sarah, and Morella remained in the chamber. The healer had been silent throughout the meeting, her ancient face unreadable. Now she stepped forward, her pale eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made the younger woman uncomfortable. There is something I have not told you. Morella's voice was soft, but carried easily in the empty chamber. Something I discovered in my examination but have been uncertain how to share. Kaelin's expression darkened. Speak. The curse in her blood is old, older than I initially believed. It was not created for Isolde. It was created for the entire Moonweaver line, designed to activate when certain conditions were met. The mate bond, the proximity to Lycan blood, the awakening of dormant powers. Isolde triggered it when she bonded with you. Seraphina has triggered it now. Sarah felt the cold in her chest pulse, as if the curse itself was responding to being spoken of. Can it be broken? Her voice was steadier than she felt. Perhaps. Morella's eyes met hers. The curse draws its power from a source, a wellspring of dark energy that sustains it across generations. If that source could be destroyed, the curse would unravel. What is the source? Varen himself. The healer's voice was grim. The curse is tied to his life force. When he dies, truly dies, the magic will die with him. The implications hung in the air. To break the curse, they would have to kill an alpha of immense power, a Lycan who had survived for 500 years and had been preparing for this war for decades. Kaelin's hand came to rest on Sarah's shoulder, warm and steady. Then that is what we will do. His voice held no doubt, no hesitation. Varen has hidden behind his dark magic for too long. It is time he faced justice for what he has done. Over the following days, Blackmoor transformed into a fortress preparing for war. Warriors trained in the courtyards from dawn until dusk, their movements growing sharper and more coordinated with each passing hour. The clash of practice swords rang through the air like a constant heartbeat. Young Lycans who had never seen battle learned to move in formation, while veterans who had thought their fighting days behind them sharpened skills that had grown rusty with peace. Supplies were inventoried and stored, weapons were sharpened and distributed, scouts were sent to monitor every approach to the stronghold. The entire mountain seemed to hum with purpose, with the grim determination of a people preparing to defend their home. And in the midst of it all, Sarah continued her research with renewed determination. Morella worked with her now, sharing knowledge that had been kept secret for centuries. The old healer taught her about the Moonweaver bloodline, about the abilities that lay dormant in her blood, about the ways she might learn to access them if she could survive long enough. The key is the connection, Morella explained during one of their sessions. Moonweavers were bridges between worlds, between species. They could sense the bonds between all living things, strengthen them, or sever them as needed. Your mother must have suppressed her abilities to hide among humans, but the power is still there, waiting to be awakened. How do I awaken it? Through the very thing the curse was designed to prevent, the mate bond. Morella's eyes were sharp on Sarah's face. The curse feeds on the connection between you and Kaelin, using it to drain your life force. But if you can learn to control that connection, to draw strength from it instead of losing strength to it, you might be able to turn the curse's own power against itself. Sarah considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. You are saying the bond could save me. I am saying it is your only hope. The healer's voice was gentle but honest. The curse is too strong to fight directly, but it was designed to destroy Moonweavers who feared their abilities, who tried to suppress the bond rather than embrace it. If you can fully accept what you are, what you could become, you might find strength that Varen never anticipated. It was a terrifying prospect. To survive, she would have to surrender to the very connection that was killing her. She would have to trust Kaelin completely, open herself to a bond that she had been fighting since the moment he found her in the forest. But what choice did she have? The answer came on a night when the moon hung full and silver over the mountains. Sarah had been walking the battlements, unable to sleep, when she found Kaelin standing alone at the highest point of the fortress. He was in his human form, but there was something of the wolf in the way he stood, alert and watchful, his golden eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the walls. She approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him, but needing the comfort of his presence. The cold was worse tonight, the curse pressing against her ribs like bands of ice, and she found that being near him helped in ways she could not explain. He spoke without turning. You should be resting. I could not sleep. She came to stand beside him, following his gaze out over the moonlit forest. Neither could you, it seems. Sleep has been difficult lately. There was something in his voice she had not heard before, a vulnerability that the king rarely allowed himself to show. When I close my eyes, I see her. Isolde. Lying in that bed, growing colder by the hour, and then her face changes, and it is yours. Sarah turned to look at him, seeing for the first time the fear behind the control. You are afraid, terrified. The admission seemed to cost him something. I have led armies into battle without hesitation. I have faced enemies who wanted nothing more than my death. But this, watching someone fade while I stand helpless to stop it, it is worse than any wound. Someone you what? The question escaped before she could stop it. Kaelin finally turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. There was no calculation there, no strategy, only raw, unguarded emotion. I did not want to feel this again. His voice was rough. After Isolde, I swore I would never open myself to this kind of pain. For 200 years, I kept that promise. And then you appeared in my forest, with your bow raised and fire in your eyes, and something in me recognized something in you. He reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that belied his strength. I know you are not Isolde. I know you are your own person, with your own history, your own strength, and that is what draws me to you. Not the echo of what was, but the reality of what you are. A hunter who chose to die free rather than live in chains. A woman who faces monsters without flinching. Someone who has shown more courage in a few weeks than most show in a lifetime. The warmth from his palm spread through her, and for a moment the cold retreated entirely. The bond. She whispered the words. Morella says I need to embrace it, that it is the only way to break the curse. And what do you want? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. What did she want? She had come to this forest expecting to die. She had found instead a world she never knew existed, a heritage she was only beginning to understand, and a man who looked at her as if she was the answer to centuries of loneliness. I want to live. The truth came out simply, without reservation. I want to understand what I am. I want to see what lies beyond the fear and the cold and the certainty of death. She placed her hand over his where it rested on her cheek. And I want to stop fighting what I feel when I am near you. The kiss, when it came, was not the possessive claiming she might have expected from a Lycan King. It was gentle, questioning, a request rather than a demand. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache, and when she responded, opening to him, accepting the connection that had been building since their first meeting, something shifted inside her. She felt the bond snap into place like a key turning in a lock. The sensation was overwhelming. Suddenly she could feel him, not just his physical presence, but the essence of who he was. 300 years of memory and emotion flooded through her, joy and grief and fury and hope all tangled together. And beneath it all, she felt his fear for her, his desperate desire to protect her, his growing love that he had tried so hard to deny. In return, she opened herself to him, her memories of her father, the lessons he had taught her, the loss she still carried, her fear of the curse, her determination to fight it, her growing trust in the man who held her, her willingness to take this leap into the unknown. The cold inside her flickered. For just a moment, the endless winter in her blood was pushed back by a warmth that came from the bond itself. She felt power stir in her veins, ancient and strange, the legacy of the Moonweaver bloodline responding to the connection it had been designed to enhance. She pulled back from the kiss, gasping, and saw her own wonder reflected in Kaelin's golden eyes. "You felt that. It was not a question." The curse weakened. His voice was awed. "When we connected, truly connected, the curse lost its grip on you." Morella was right. Sarah's mind was racing. The bond is not just a vulnerability, it is a weapon. If we can strengthen it enough, if we can learn to use it deliberately, we can break the curse, Kaelin finished her thought, and we can defeat Varen. For the first time since learning of her illness, Sarah felt genuine hope bloom in her chest. There was a path forward now, a way to fight back against the death sentence that had been placed on her bloodline. But the hope was short-lived. A horn sounded from the watchtower, long and urgent, the signal for approaching riders. Kaelin's expression shifted instantly from tenderness to alertness, the king reasserting himself over the man. "Stay here." He was already moving toward the stairs. "I will find out what is happening." Sarah followed anyway, unwilling to be left behind at such a moment. They reached the main courtyard just as a small party rode through the gates, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. The lead rider carried a banner she did not recognize, a thorn branch wreathed in blood-red flames. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a Lycan and approached Kaelin with the careful neutrality of an emissary. "King Kaelin of Blackmoor," his voice carried the formal cadence of official speech. "I bring a message from Lord Varen of the Bloodthorn Pack." He held out a scroll sealed with dark wax. Kaelin took it, his expression unreadable. The courtyard was silent as he broke the seal and read the contents. Sarah watched his face, saw the moment when something changed in his eyes, a flash of fury quickly suppressed. He lowered the scroll and looked at the emissary with cold golden eyes. "You may tell your lord that his offer is rejected." His voice was ice. "There will be no negotiation, no surrender. And if he believes for one moment that I will hand over what is mine to save my own skin, he has forgotten who he is dealing with." The emissary inclined his head. "Lord Varen anticipated your response. He asked me to deliver a second message should you refuse." The man's eyes flickered to Sarah, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. "He says to tell the Moonweaver that he remembers her mother, that Helena died badly, screaming your father's name, and that he will take great pleasure in ensuring that the daughter meets the same fate." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mother had not simply died of fever, as she had always believed. She had been murdered, killed by the same creature who was now hunting her. Everything her father had told her, every gentle lie he had whispered to protect her from the truth, crumbled to dust in an instant. Kaelin moved so fast she barely saw it. One moment he was standing before the emissary. The next, his hand was around the man's throat, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. "You will deliver a message of your own." Kaelin's voice had dropped to a growl that was barely human. "Tell Varen that he has made his last mistake. Tell him that I am coming for him, and I will tear his heart from his chest with my own hands. Tell him that the Moonweaver is under my protection, and to touch her is to declare war on all of Blackmoor." He released the emissary, who stumbled back, gasping for breath. "Now get out of my sight, before I forget that killing messengers is forbidden by ancient law." The Bloodthorn delegation fled into the night, and Sarah stood in the courtyard surrounded by warriors who were already reaching for weapons, already preparing for the conflict that had just become inevitable. She had come to the Blackwood seeking a free death. Instead, she had found a war, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the mountains, an enemy who had destroyed her mother was waiting to destroy her as well. But she was not the frightened girl who had fled Thornhaven. She was not the dying woman who had expected nothing but a cold end in a frozen forest. She was Seraphina Ashford, last of the Moonweavers, mate of the Lycan King, and she would not go quietly. She reached out and took Kaelin's hand, feeling the bond pulse between them, feeling the power that waited to be claimed. "Together," she said, "we face this together." He looked down at her, and for a moment the fury in his eyes softened to something warmer. Together, he agreed, to the end. The war had begun. But first, Sarah had a decision to make, a decision that would shape everything that came after. That night, alone in Kaelin's chambers while he met with his war council, she stared into the fire and thought about everything she had learned, about her mother, murdered by Varen's dark magic, about Isolde, killed by the same curse that was slowly claiming her, about all the Moonweavers who had died over the centuries, hunted by a creature who could not accept that he had been rejected. She thought about Kaelin and the way he had kissed her and the fear she had felt in him through the bond, fear for her, fear of losing her the way he had lost Isolde. And she thought about the war that was coming, the lives that would be lost, the blood that would be spilled, all because of her. The thought crystallized slowly, taking shape in the quiet of the night. Varen wanted her. He wanted to use her blood, her power, to fuel his dark magic and destroy the bond that connected her to Kaelin. If she went to him willingly, if she gave herself up, perhaps she could end this before it began. Perhaps she could save them all. She knew what Kaelin would say. She knew what Darius had warned her about, but she also knew that she could not stand by and watch people die for her sake. She was a hunter's daughter. She had been raised to protect others, not to hide behind walls while others fought her battles. The letter she wrote was short, the words carefully chosen to explain what she could not say aloud. "You have already lost too much because of me and those like me. I will not let you lose more. I go to Varen willingly, on my own terms. Perhaps my surrender will be enough to satisfy his hunger. Perhaps it will buy time for you to prepare, to find another way. Do not follow me. Do not try to save me. This is my choice, the choice of a free woman. I am sorry for everything. Yours, Seraphina." She left the letter on his pillow, where he would find it when he returned. Then she gathered her father's hunting knife, her mother's pendant, and the worn leather of her hunting clothes. The guards at the gate did not stop her. She was the king's mate, after all, free to move as she pleased. She walked out into the darkness, toward the east, toward the enemy who waited. The snow crunched beneath her boots, each step taking her further from the safety of Blackmoor's walls, further from the man who had shown her that life could hold more than mere survival. The forest closed around her like a living thing, branches reaching overhead to block out the stars, shadows pooling in the spaces between ancient trees. She did not look back. She could not afford to. If she looked back, she might lose her nerve. She might remember the warmth of Kaelin's arms, the way his golden eyes softened when he looked at her, the bond that pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. And if she remembered those things, she might not be able to do what needed to be done. And somewhere behind her, in the fortress of Blackmoor, a king returned to empty chambers and a letter that would shatter his world. The scream of rage that tore from his throat echoed off the mountains, a sound of pure anguish that sent every Lycan in the stronghold reaching for their weapons. She was gone, and the hunt was about to begin. The fortress of Bloodthorn rose from the eastern mountains like a wound in the earth. Where Blackmoor had been carved with artistry and purpose, this stronghold seemed to have been torn from the living rock by claws of rage. Its walls were jagged and irregular, its towers twisted at angles that defied natural architecture. The stone itself was darker here, stained by centuries of blood sacrifices and dark rituals that Sarah could feel pressing against her skin like an invisible weight. She had walked through the night and into the following day, driven by a determination that bordered on madness. The curse had grown stronger with every mile she put between herself and Kaelin, the cold seeping deeper into her bones until she could barely feel her fingers or toes. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, toward the fate she had chosen. The Bloodthorn sentries found her at the edge of their territory, a lone human woman stumbling through the snow with frost in her hair and death in her eyes. They surrounded her with weapons drawn, their amber and silver gazes filled with suspicion and hunger. "I am Seraphina Ashford." Her voice was steady despite the cold. "Last of the Moonweavers, I have come to speak with Lord Varen." The name seemed to ripple through the gathered Lycans like a stone dropped in still water. They exchanged glances, uncertainty warring with trained hostility. The Blackmoor whore. One of them stepped forward, a scarred warrior with eyes the color of dried blood. "Lord Varen said you might come. He also said we were not to harm you." The warrior's smile was cruel. Yet, they escorted her through the gates and into the heart of the fortress, past training grounds where warriors practiced with a brutality that made Blackmoor's preparations look civilized. The Bloodthorn pack moved differently than Kaelin's people, their every gesture carrying an undertone of violence barely restrained. These were not soldiers. They were predators waiting to be unleashed. The throne room of Bloodthorn was a cathedral of darkness. Massive pillars of black stone supported a ceiling lost in shadow. Torches burned with a strange blue flame that cast no warmth, only an eerie illumination that made every face look like a skull. And at the far end, seated on a throne carved from the bones of some massive creature, was Varen. He was not what she had expected. Where Kaelin was power restrained, controlled by centuries of discipline, Varen was power unleashed. He was smaller than the Blackmoor king, leaner, but there was a coiled intensity to him that made her skin crawl. His hair was pure white, falling past his shoulders like a river of snow. His face was beautiful in the way that a blade was beautiful, sharp and cold, and designed for a single purpose. And his eyes were the color of fresh blood, crimson orbs that fixed on her with an interest that made her stomach turn. He rose as she approached, his movements fluid and predatory. Seraphina Ashford. His voice was silk over steel, smooth and dangerous. Daughter of Helena, granddaughter of the last true Moonweaver matriarch. I have waited a very long time to meet you. He descended from his throne, each step deliberate, circling her with the lazy confidence of a cat playing with a mouse. You have your mother's face, the same stubborn jaw, the same fire in the eyes. She had that same look when I found her, you know, that same defiance. It made breaking her all the more satisfying. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to remain still. She had not come here to fight. She had come to negotiate, to offer herself in exchange for peace. I came to make a deal. Varen laughed, and the sound echoed through the cavernous chamber like the tolling of a funeral bell. A deal. The Moonweaver wishes to bargain. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could smell the copper tang of old blood on his breath. And what could you possibly offer me that I cannot simply take? My willing cooperation. Sarah met his crimson gaze without flinching. The curse requires Moonweaver blood to sustain itself. Blood given freely is more powerful than blood taken by force. You know this. It is why you have hunted my line for 500 years, rather than simply capturing and draining us. Something flickered in those blood-red eyes. Interest, perhaps, or recognition of a truth he had not expected her to know. You have been doing your research. I have been learning what I am. Sarah pressed her advantage. I know about the dual bond. I know that Isolde was meant to be your mate as much as she was Kaelin's. I know that when she chose him, you could not accept it. So you destroyed her, and every woman who carried her bloodline, because if you could not have what you wanted, no one could. Varen's expression did not change, but something in the air around him shifted. The temperature dropped. The blue flames flickered. Careful, little Moonweaver. His voice had lost its silky quality, revealing the razor beneath. You speak of things you do not understand. Then help me understand. Sarah refused to back down. You were not always like this. You were a lord, a leader. What happened to make you into a monster? The silence that followed was absolute. Varen stared at her, and for just a moment she saw something behind the cruelty, something old and broken and filled with a pain that had festered for centuries. What happened? He repeated the question as if tasting something bitter. What happened was humanity. He turned away from her, moving to a window that looked out over the mountains. 500 years ago, I was not so different from Kaelin. I believed in the treaty. I believed that Lycans and humans could coexist. I had a mate, a beautiful woman from a village near the border. We had children, 3 sons who carried my blood and her gentleness. I thought I had found something worth protecting. His voice had changed, the cruelty replaced by something raw. The hunters came on a winter night, much like this one. Humans who had decided that the treaty was a mistake, that Lycans were abominations to be exterminated. They burned our home while we slept. My mate died in my arms, her flesh blackened by their torches. My sons, the youngest only 5 winters old, were cut down as they tried to flee. He turned back to face her, and his crimson eyes were burning. I killed them all. Every hunter, every villager who had sheltered them, every human within 100 miles who had known of the raid and done nothing to stop it. I bathed in their blood, and when I was done, I swore that I would never again trust anything that wore human skin. And Isolde? Isolde was a test, a cruel joke of the fates. He laughed bitterly. After centuries of hatred, I felt the mate bond again. With a human. A moonweaver, yes, but still carrying human blood in her veins. I thought perhaps I could overcome what I was. Perhaps her power could heal the wounds that had never closed. But she chose Kaelin. She chose Kaelin. Varen's voice hardened. She looked at me and saw only the monster. She looked at him and saw a king. She rejected me, and in doing so, proved what I had always known. Humans are incapable of seeing beyond their own limitations. They will always choose their own kind over us, no matter how much we might love them. So you killed her. Sarah's voice was quiet. You killed an innocent woman and her unborn child because she did not love you. I killed her because she was a threat. Varen's mask of civility cracked, revealing the beast beneath. A moonweaver bonded to the king of Blackmoor would have united the packs under his banner. She would have borne children with power beyond anything our kind has seen. She would have tipped the balance against everything I had built. And me? Sarah asked. What am I to you? Varen smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. You are the last piece of a puzzle 500 years in the making. The curse I created was never meant to simply kill. It was designed to collect. Every moonweaver who has died, every drop of blood the curse has consumed, has been gathered and stored, waiting for the moment when it could be used. For what? For resurrection. Varen's eyes blazed with fanatic intensity. The magic exists to bring back those who have passed beyond the veil. It requires sacrifice, requires power beyond what any single being can provide. But with the accumulated life force of an entire bloodline, with the willing blood of the last moonweaver, you want to bring back your family. Sarah understood now, and the horror of it made her sick. You have been murdering women for 500 years to fuel a spell that will resurrect your dead wife and children. I will have them back. Varen's voice rose. I will undo what was done to me, and then I will burn this world to ashes. Humans, Lycans, everyone who stood by while my family was slaughtered. None of them will survive what is coming. He seized her arm, his grip crushing, and began to drag her toward a doorway she had not noticed before. And you, Seraphina Ashford, are going to help me do it. The chamber beyond the throne room was a nightmare made manifest. It was a laboratory of sorts, filled with glass containers that held things Sarah did not want to examine too closely. Runes were carved into the floor, forming patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when she looked at them directly. At the center of the room stood an altar of black stone, stained with centuries of blood, surrounded by candles that burned with the same cold blue flame as the torches in the throne room. And behind the altar, preserved in crystal cases, were 3 bodies. A woman with dark hair and gentle features, frozen in eternal sleep. 3 young boys, ranging from perhaps 5 to 12 winters, their faces peaceful despite the violence that had ended their lives. They looked as if they might wake at any moment, as if 500 years had not passed since they drew their last breaths. My Elena. Varen's voice was almost tender as he looked at the preserved corpses. My sons, Marcus, Thomas, and little Julian. I have kept them safe all these years, waiting for the moment when I could bring them home. Sarah stared at the bodies, understanding at last the depth of Varen's madness. This was not simply revenge. This was obsession, a wound that had never been allowed to heal because he had spent 5 centuries nursing it instead of letting it close. They would not want this. She spoke carefully, aware of how close she was to pushing him over an edge he was already teetering on. Your Elena, your sons, if they could see what you have become, what you have done in their names. Be silent. Varen's grip tightened on her arm. You know nothing of what they would want. You know nothing of love, of loss, of the emptiness that comes from watching everything you value turn to ash. He threw her toward the altar and she stumbled, catching herself on the cold stone. "The ritual requires your blood, freely given." His voice had become businesslike. The moment of vulnerability passed. "You came here of your own will. That satisfies the first condition. Now you will open your veins over this altar, and you will let your life drain away to feed the spell. In return, your death will be quick, and Kaelin's pack will be spared when I march on Blackmoor." Sarah looked at the altar, at the runes that covered its surface, at the centuries of dried blood that had seeped into the stone. She had come here prepared to die. She had accepted that her sacrifice might be necessary to protect those she had come to care for. But this was not sacrifice, this was fuel for a madman's delusion. She turned to face Varen, her back against the altar, her father's hunting knife hidden in the folds of her cloak. "No." Varen's expression flickered between confusion and rage. "You came here to offer yourself. You said you wanted to make a deal. I came here to understand." Sarah's voice was steady. "I came here to face the monster who murdered my mother, who has hunted my bloodline for 500 years. I thought perhaps there might be something left in you worth saving, some fragment of the man you were before grief twisted you into this thing." She drew the knife, holding it before her in a grip her father had taught her. "I was wrong. You are not a tragedy. You are a disease, and I will not let my blood be used to spread your sickness further." Varen stared at her for a long moment, and then he laughed. It was not the theatrical laugh of the throne room. It was something darker, more genuine, touched with the hysteria of a mind long since unmoored from sanity. "You think that little blade will stop me? You think your defiance matters? I have waited 500 years for this moment. I have killed dozens of your ancestors. I have toppled kingdoms and slaughtered armies. You are nothing but a dying girl with a knife." He began to move toward her, and Sarah raised the blade, knowing it was useless, knowing she was about to die, but refusing to go without a fight. "Perhaps I am." Her voice did not waver. "But I am also the last of the Moonweavers, the last of a line you have spent centuries trying to destroy. And if I die here, I die knowing that your curse dies with me. Your ritual fails, your family stays dead, and you will have nothing but your madness to keep you company for the rest of your miserable existence." Varen's face contorted with fury. He lunged for her, claws extending, jaws shifting to something between human and wolf. And then the wall exploded. Stone and dust filled the air, and through the breach came a figure that Sarah would have recognized anywhere. Kaelin, in his full wolf form, massive and terrible and blazing with a fury that made Varen's rage look like a candle beside a bonfire. His golden eyes found hers across the chaos, and she felt the bond between them pulse with a force that pushed back the cold in her chest. He was not alone. Behind him came Darius and Marcus, and a dozen of Blackmoor's finest warriors, pouring through the gap in the wall like a tide of fangs and claws. The battle was joined in an instant. Varen shifted fully, his white wolf form smaller than Kaelin's but faster, more vicious. The two kings crashed together with a sound like thunder, their jaws snapping, their claws tearing furrows in each other's flesh. The impact shook the walls, sent dust raining from the ancient ceiling, cracked the stone floor beneath their weight. Around them, Bloodthorn warriors rushed to defend their lord, meeting the Blackmoor assault with desperate ferocity. Sarah pressed herself against the altar, watching the chaos unfold with wide eyes. The violence was unlike anything she had witnessed, primal and savage in a way that human warfare could never match. These were not soldiers fighting for territory or resources. These were wolves fighting for pack, for honor, for survival. She saw Darius take down a Bloodthorn warrior with a single savage strike, his gray form moving with the efficiency of a predator who had spent centuries perfecting his craft. She saw Marcus, the old commander, fighting with a precision that belied his age, each movement economical and deadly, wasting no energy, leaving no opening for counterattack. She saw blood spray across the runes carved into the floor, saw bodies fall and rise and fall again, saw the tide of battle surge back and forth across the chamber, and she saw Kaelin and Varen locked in combat that was tearing the chamber apart. They fought without mercy, without restraint. Centuries of hatred and grief fueled every blow, every bite, every slash of claw. Kaelin was larger, stronger, but Varen was faster, more experienced in the kind of dirty fighting that came from 500 years of war. They were evenly matched, and the battle showed no sign of ending. until Varen played his final card. The white wolf broke away from Kaelin and lunged not toward the Blackmoor King, but toward Sarah. He shifted mid-leap, returning to human form, his hand closing around her throat before anyone could react. "Enough!" His voice echoed through the chamber, silencing the battle. "Put down your weapons or I snap her neck." The fighting stopped. Every eye turned to where Varen held Sarah against the altar, his claws pricking the soft skin of her throat. Kaelin shifted as well, rising to his feet in human form, his body covered in wounds that were already beginning to heal. His golden eyes were fixed on Varen with a hatred so pure it seemed to burn. "Release her." His voice was barely controlled. "This is between you and me." "It has always been between you and me." Varen's grip tightened, and Sarah felt blood trickle down her neck. "Since the day Isolde chose you over me. Since the day you took everything that should have been mine. Isolde was never yours." Kaelin took a step forward, and Varen's claws dug deeper. She made her choice freely. You could have accepted it. You could have moved on. Instead, you chose to become the very thing that destroyed your family. Something flickered in Varen's crimson eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of the man he had once been. "I had no choice. My family was taken from me. My mate rejected me. What else was there but revenge? There was life." Kaelin's voice softened, just slightly. There was the chance to honor their memory by becoming something better, not something worse. Elena would not have wanted this. Your sons would not have wanted this. Look at what you have become, Varen. Look at the monster you have created in their names. Varen's hand trembled against Sarah's throat. For just a moment his grip loosened, and in that moment Sarah acted. The power had been building inside her since Kaelin breached the wall, since the bond between them flared back to life. She could feel it now, the legacy of the Moonweaver bloodline, the ability to sense and manipulate the connections between living things. Varen's curse had suppressed it, feeding on the very energy that should have awakened it. But the curse drew its power from Varen himself, and Varen was distracted, his attention split between Kaelin and the emotional wounds that had just been torn open. Sarah reached inside herself and pulled. The sensation was like nothing she had ever experienced. It was like grasping a thread of fire and ice simultaneously, like feeling the heartbeat of every living creature in the room, like understanding for the first time that she was not alone in the universe, but connected to everything that breathed and moved and loved. She found the curse in her blood, the dark magic that had been slowly killing her. She found its source, the tether that connected it to Varen's life force, and she pulled. Varen screamed. It was a sound of pure agony, of 500 years of accumulated power being torn from him in a single instant. The curse unraveled, its dark energy dispersing into nothing, and with it went the strength he had stolen from generations of Moonweaver women. His grip on Sarah's throat vanished. He staggered backward, suddenly diminished, suddenly old in a way he had not been moments before. "What have you done?" His voice was a whisper, broken and lost. "What have you done to me?" Sarah stood on shaking legs, the power still flowing through her, still burning in her veins. She felt stronger than she ever had, felt the bond with Kaelin pulsing like a second heart, felt the weight of her ancestors' legacy settling onto her shoulders. "I have taken back what you stole." Her voice carried a resonance it had never had before. "Every life you ended to fuel your curse, every drop of blood you consumed, I have reclaimed it. You are nothing now, Varen. Nothing but an old wolf with old wounds and no power left to hide behind." Varen looked at his hands, watching them tremble. He looked at the crystal cases where his family lay preserved. He looked at Kaelin, who stood ready to end him, and something in his expression changed. The madness did not disappear. 500 years of insanity could not be erased in a moment. But beneath it, visible for the first time, was exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-crushing weariness that had been hidden by rage and power for so long that he had forgotten it existed. "So this is how it ends." His voice was quiet, almost peaceful. Not in triumph, but in defeat. Not resurrecting my family, but joining them. He looked at Kaelin, and for a moment the two kings regarded each other without hatred. "Will you grant me one mercy, old enemy?" Kaelin studied him, his expression unreadable. "What mercy?" "End it cleanly." Varen gestured toward the crystal cases. "And when I am gone, destroy those. Burn them. Let them finally rest." He straightened, and despite everything, there was a dignity in his bearing that had been absent before. "I have been a monster. I will not pretend otherwise, but I was not always one, and the creature that I became, the things I have done, Elena would be ashamed. My sons would be horrified. Perhaps in death, I can find the peace that escaped me in life." Kaelin moved toward him, his expression unreadable. "What you have done cannot be forgiven. What you have taken cannot be returned. The Moonweavers you murdered, the wars you started, the suffering you caused. There is no redemption for crimes of that magnitude." "I know." Varen met his gaze without flinching. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for an end. I am asking for the warrior's death I denied myself when I chose vengeance over honor." The chamber was silent. Everyone watched as the two kings faced each other, enemies for 3 centuries, bound together by grief and love and loss. Kaelin nodded slowly. "Then I grant you this mercy, not because you deserve it, but because the man you were, the father and husband who was destroyed by human cruelty, that man deserved better than what you became." He shifted, his body flowing into the massive wolf form that was his birthright. Varen did not shift. He simply knelt, bowing his head, exposing his neck. The strike was quick and clean. One moment Varen was kneeling. The next, his body lay still, his crimson eyes closed forever, his face peaceful in a way it had not been in 500 years. The silence that followed was sacred. Kaelin shifted back to human form and stood over the body of his oldest enemy. There was no triumph in his expression, only a weary sorrow that spoke of battles fought too long and victories that came too late. "It is done." His voice was quiet. "The war is over." Sarah moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. Around them, Bloodthorn warriors laid down their weapons, their lord dead, their cause finished. The Blackmoor forces moved among them with cautious efficiency, taking surrenders, treating wounds, beginning the long process of making peace from the wreckage of war. Darius approached, his gray eyes moving from the body to the crystal cases to Sarah herself. "What happens now?" Kaelin turned to look at his beta, then at the preserved bodies of Varen's family. "Now we honor a request." He moved to the cases, his expression heavy. These were innocents. Whatever Varen became, his family did not deserve to be used as fuel for madness. We will give them proper rites and let them finally rest. The destruction of his preservation spells was almost gentle. The bodies aged 500 years in moments, crumbling to dust that scattered in a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. And as the last particles dispersed, Sarah could have sworn she heard something. A woman's voice, soft with gratitude. The laughter of children, free at last. Then it was gone, and only silence remained. They left Bloodthorn as dawn broke over the mountains. The fortress would be occupied, its people absorbed into the Blackmoor pack or released to seek their own paths. The dark magic that had saturated its walls would take years to cleanse, but the source of that magic was dead, and without it, the darkness would fade. Sarah rode with Kaelin, her body pressed against his back as his wolf form carried her through the snow. The curse was gone from her blood, burned away by the power she had claimed. For the first time in months, she felt truly warm. But there were questions that needed answers, and as they traveled, she found herself thinking about all that had happened. "You came for me." She spoke into his fur, knowing he could hear her. "I told you not to. I told you to let me go." Kaelin's stride did not falter, but she felt his response through the bond. "You told me many things. Some of them were even true. But you did not tell me that you had stopped wanting to live. So I chose to believe that underneath the sacrifice, underneath the fear, there was still a woman who wanted to be saved. And if there had not been, then I would have avenged you." His mental voice was quiet. "And then I would have found a way to follow." The simplicity of this statement struck her harder than any declaration of love could have. He had come not because he thought he could win, not because he had some clever plan, but because the alternative, living without her, was simply unacceptable. "What happens now?" She asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "The curse is broken. Varen is dead. The war is over. But what does that mean for us?" Kaelin slowed, then stopped, letting her slide from his back. He shifted, rising to his feet in human form, and turned to face her. They were standing in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the branches to paint the snow in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful, peaceful, a moment of stillness after the chaos of battle. What happens now is your choice. Kaelin's golden eyes met hers. You came to my forest seeking death. You found something else instead, a heritage you never knew you had, a bond that could tie you to my world forever, a war that you helped to end. He reached out, his hand cupping her face with the same gentleness he had shown in those first days at Blackmoor. I will not pretend that what I feel for you is simple. It is not the same as what I felt for Isolde, and I am grateful for that. She was my past. You are something different, something I did not know I was still capable of feeling. And what is that? Hope. The word was soft, almost fragile. You have given me hope, Seraphina. Hope that the future can be different from the past. Hope that love does not have to end in tragedy. Hope that I can be more than the cold king who hides from his own heart. Sarah studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the strength, the loneliness beneath the power. She thought about everything she had lost, her father, her mother, the life she had known in Thornhaven, and she thought about everything she had found, a heritage, a purpose, a man who looked at her like she was the answer to centuries of questions. I am not Isolde. She needed him to hear this, to understand it completely. I will never be her replacement, her echo, her shadow. If we do this, if we truly commit to this bond, it has to be because you want me. Seraphina, the hunter's daughter, the last moonweaver, all of my flaws and fears and uncertainties. Kaelin smiled, and it transformed his face, chasing away the shadows, revealing the man beneath the king. I do not want Isolde. She is at peace now, and I am grateful for the time we had. What I want is you, the woman who raised her bow against a Lycan King, the woman who faced Varen in his own stronghold with nothing but a knife and her courage, the woman who tore a 500-year-old curse apart with her bare hands. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to run with you under the full moon and show you what it means to be truly free. I want to build something new with you, something that honors the past without being chained to it. His lips brushed against hers, soft and questioning. Will you stay? The answer came not in words, but in action. Sarah closed the distance between them, her arms wrapping around his neck, her lips meeting his in a kiss that sealed a promise neither of them had known they were making. The bond between them flared, bright and warm and unbreakable. The power of the Moonweaver bloodline sang in her veins, no longer suppressed, no longer hungry, finally at peace. And the cold that had lived in her bones for so long melted away, replaced by a warmth that came from within. When they finally parted, Kaelin was smiling in a way she had never seen before, open, unguarded, free. Welcome home, Seraphina. She took his hand, feeling the strength of his grip, the steady beat of his heart through the bond. Take me there. The return to Blackmoor was a triumph. Word had spread ahead of them, carried by swift runners and loyal scouts. The news of Varen's defeat, of the curses breaking, of the war's end, raced through the northern territories like wildfire. By the time Kaelin and Sarah approached the gates of the stronghold, the entire pack had gathered to witness their return. The courtyard was filled to overflowing with Lycans of all ages, from grizzled veterans who remembered the beginning of the conflict to young cubs who had never known a world without the threat of bloodthorn. Warriors who had fought at their side stood at attention, their wounds still healing, their eyes bright with the pride of victory. Families who had lost loved ones to Varen's raids stood with tears streaming down their faces, knowing at last that their grief would not be compounded by more death. Elders who had doubted the Moonweaver's place among them bowed their heads in respect, acknowledging with that simple gesture that they had been wrong. Even Elder Thorn, the voice of tradition and caution, the one who had argued most strenuously against allowing a human into their midst, stepped forward to offer formal welcome. The War Council met that evening, but it was not to plan battle. It was to plan peace. The Bloodthorn territory would be absorbed, its people given the choice between integration and exile. The other packs, Silverfang and Ironpaw, had already sent messages of congratulation and pledges of alliance. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Lycan nation stood united. And at the center of it all stood Sarah, no longer a stranger or a prisoner or an anomaly, but something new entirely. She was formally recognized before the assembled pack, given the title that Morella had first whispered in the healing chamber. Moonweaver, bridge between worlds, the human who had proven herself worthy of standing beside a king. Kaelin spoke the words of the bonding ceremony himself, his golden eyes never leaving hers as he pledged himself to her before gods and ancestors. And when she repeated the vows, when she accepted the burden and the blessing of being his mate, she felt something click into place inside her soul. A rightness, a belonging. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The celebration lasted through the night and into the following day. There was feasting and dancing and howling at the moon. Warriors who had been preparing for war found themselves celebrating peace instead. Old grudges were set aside, old wounds were allowed to begin healing, old fears were laid to rest. The dark cloud that had hung over Blackmoor for 2 centuries lifted, and in its place was something that felt remarkably like joy. Children ran through the halls laughing, their parents too happy to scold them. Musicians played songs that had not been heard since before the war began, and through it all, the bond between Kaelin and Sarah pulsed with a warmth that seemed to spread to everyone around them. And when the festivities finally wound down, when the fires burned low and the revelers sought their beds, Kaelin took Sarah's hand and led her to the chambers that were now theirs together. They did not speak. They did not need to. The bond between them carried everything that words could not express: love and desire, and the bone-deep relief of finding home after a lifetime of wandering. The night passed in warmth and discovery, and when dawn came, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, Sarah woke in the arms of her mate, her king, her partner. She thought of her father, who had taught her to be strong, who had placed a bow in her hands and declared that his daughter would never be helpless, who had loved a woman from another world and accepted her without question. She thought of her mother, who had carried a secret heritage across the border and paid for it with her life, who had given up everything she was for a chance at something different, who had loved a human man enough to become human herself, even knowing what it would cost her. She remembered the songs her mother used to sing, the strange melodies in languages she did not recognize, and she understood now that those had been Moonweaver songs, the same kind of songs that Isolde had sung in these very halls. She thought of all the Moonweavers who had come before her, who had died so that she might live. Generations of women carrying power they could never fully use, hiding from a curse they could not escape, hoping against hope that someday someone would break the cycle. Their blood flowed in her veins. Their strength had become her strength. Their songs lived on in her memory, and their sacrifice had not been in vain. And she thought of the future, children perhaps, who would carry both Lycan strength and Moonweaver power, a new generation who would grow up knowing that the boundaries between peoples were not walls, but bridges, peace between species that had warred for generations, a world slowly healing from wounds that had festered for too long. It would not be easy. There would be challenges ahead, old prejudices to overcome, new threats to face. The work of building bridges was never finished, but for the first time it seemed possible. Kaelin stirred beside her, his golden eyes opening to meet hers. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking about my mother." Sarah's voice was soft. About why she left the Blackwood, why she gave up everything she was to live among humans. "I think I understand now." "And what do you understand?" "That she was not running away. She was running toward something, toward my father, toward a life she chose for herself, even though it was dangerous, even though it cost her everything. She loved him enough to become someone new, and he loved her enough to accept her, secrets and all." Kaelin's arm tightened around her. "Your parents would be proud of you." Sarah smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle into her heart. "I know." Outside, the sun rose over the mountains of Blackmoor. Somewhere in the forest, wolves began their morning hunt. In the stronghold below, a pack was waking to the first day of a new era, and in the king's chambers, high above it all, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds lay tangled together, watching the light grow stronger, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The law of wolf and blood had been written in war, but love, as it turned out, had laws of its own. End of Part 3. The End.